What does your personal financial framework look like? Stick around to the end and I'll tell you a little bit about what mine looks like. But the thing is, so many of us didn't have good financial role models growing up, and we might not even understand fully the different types of accounts that are available to us. And not understanding these accounts definitely cost me a lot of money, from ages 18 to 25 until I really started getting serious about understanding personal finance. So I'm going to go through and just describe the different types of accounts that you might want to consider looking into to build your financial framework. And so the first one is, of course, the checking account. And the checking account is kind of like your wallet in the bank. That's where all your money comes in, all your money goes out. You can write checks, like those little things with a little piece of paper, and you gotta, sign your name and put it in the mail. Sometimes you do have to still write those. So obviously that's where the checking account gets its name. But of course you also have a debit card that you can swipe and, buy things like groceries or pay your rent or Netflix, or you can do ACH payments, which we'll talk about in the future at some point, I'm sure. But basically imagine this is like your everyday spending wallet. So the next type of account is a savings account. And it's kind of like your piggy bank, if you will, inside the bank. This is where you keep money for short-term goals. Maybe you're saving for a trip or something like that. And it earns, this thing we, kind of like thank you money that we call interest. Now, the bad news is it's not very much. If you have $1,000 in a typical savings account, you might be making something like 50 cents per month. And most people I see will walk by a quarter on the ground. So 50 cents is definitely not anything to write home about. And actually, I just closed my savings account like last month. And it was funny because when I went in, the teller, I was like, hey, I want to close this account. And she like gasped. I'm like, well, you really don't get much for it. And by the way, I have the next type of account, which is called a high yield savings account. And it's the same idea basically, but it's a lot better. Instead of getting, 0.06% interest every year, you can actually get, in most cases right now, around 4.5% interest. So for that same $1,000, instead of making 50 cents, you're going to be making $4. And where the power really comes from this is if you have like your emergency fund or something put into there where maybe you have 10 or 20,000. If you have 20,000 in there, you're going to be making something like $75 per month or $900 per year. So that's not bad, right? That actually has a meaningful impact. So that's where you can really see a lot of the benefits for that. Now, the one thing I will say about high yield savings accounts, and there's all sorts of different ones from different companies, most banks don't have them. It's mostly like third party type of investment type companies. But if you search for it, you'll find lots of options. But the one thing I will caution you is they're not always instant transfers. So like how you can transfer money from your savings to your checking account instantly. When you go and transfer money to third party companies and things like that, sometimes there is a delay. So if you need to get quick access to the money, you do need, sometimes that's a problem. Not for every company, but that is something to consider. You do have to do a little bit of planning if you need to transfer money around. And one last thing on the high yield savings is that unfortunately you typically do have to pay tax on the gains of that account. So just keep that in mind. And then of course, on topic for another day, we have different types of brokerage accounts and retirement accounts. And that's where you put money that you want to grow over the long term. Now, the difference here is obviously there's a lot more risk involved in investing in the stock market, the S&P 500, mutual funds, things like that. There's risk involved in it, right? It can go down. Now, with the high yield savings, you really only have the upside, but it's capped at that 4.5% versus, the S&P 500 and typical mutual funds that, the historic returns of the S&P 500, is around 10% historically. So obviously there's a big gap between 4.5% and 10% growth. So it's just a way to help you hedge against inflation. Again, a topic for another day, so stick around to discuss those. But one last thing, a couple of key takeaways here. The checking account, you don't want to stockpile your money there. You kind of want the least amount of money possible to make sure you're paying all of your bills. And the rest you want to put someplace where it is going to work for you. So whether that be, your high yield savings, at least you're getting something for it. So because a lot of people I know, they just stockpile because it makes them feel good having it in their checking account. But it can make you feel even better if you put it someplace that it's actually doing some good for you. The high yield savings, it's a great place for your emergency fund. Let it grow while it's sitting there. And then investments, obviously, that's where you're going to be planning for the future. Okay, I promised to tell you what we do in our family. So we have paycheck 1, paycheck 2. My wife does not have a 401k, so she does have an IRA. I do have a 401k with an employer match, so some percentage of my paycheck goes directly into that. The rest goes into the checking account. Out of the checking account, we pay all the bills, credit cards, anything that we have on ACH to save money. Again, if you can save a little bit of money by doing the auto pay through ACH, always a good option, or at least something to consider. Out of the checking account, we typically keep around 2 months worth of expenses in the checking account directly. Our high yield savings account, I think it's less than 24 hours to transfer. So it's not that big of a deal, but just to be safe, we keep about 2 months in the checking. Then we have our emergency fund in the high yield savings. And then after that, we fill up my wife's IRA. And then once that's full and we have the emergency funds fully funded and everything, the rest just goes into our brokerage account. So that's what we have set up. But let me know down in the comments, what is your personal finance framework? I'd love to know what accounts that you use personally, how many accounts you have. Do you have multiple checking accounts, things like that? I'd love to hear more about your system. And if you like nerding out about personal finance topics, well, hey, follow along for a whole lot more.